Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com. How do you feel about objections? Now, how you answer that question is critical, because if your mindset is not right, it doesn't matter what your technique is. Let's get into it today on The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone once again to The Buyer's Mind. I'm Jeff Shore, your host here on this podcast where we try to take a dive into the brains of the customers who are thinking about making a purchase decision. If we figure out how they want to buy, then we can figure out how we want to sell. We always want to sell in a way that'll make it easy for our customers to buy. That's our mission. That's what we're all about. I'm joined, as always, by our show producer, Paul Murphy. And Murphy, you're out there. You're a consumer like the rest of us. When you're out there, you never find exactly what you're looking for, do you?
No, not exactly. So it becomes a fishing game.
Sure, absolutely. And so then you're going through that process, and hopefully at some point you find that person that you can trust enough at least to ask a question. But from time to time, you're out shopping for something, Murph, and it's not exactly what you're looking for. That's where that salesperson is going to come into play. Are you somebody who is quick to raise the objection, or are you a little bit hesitant to raise that objection?
Usually a little hesitant. I don't want to seem negative going into the process, but eventually it's going to come up.
Right. So what are you hoping for from a salesperson when you raise an objection?
Well, when I raise an objection, they should have answers. And if they don't, then my confidence goes down a little bit.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I would also assume that when you're bringing up that objection, that you're looking for somebody who does not look panicked, right? What would be the effect of the salesperson if they look a little panicky when you raise an objection?
Ooh, then my confidence is going to plummet like a rock.
Yeah, right. No question about it. And that confidence is contagious. And that's what we want to get into today. We want to talk about objections. This is something where if you're a sales professional, you are never a complete sales professional until you have mastered the art of handling objections, of dealing with rejection, of making sure that both your mindset and your skill set are lined up for this very, very important part of the process. Not only is it an important part of the process, but it's a natural part of the process. It's an expected part of the process. And I'll tell you why. When you think about the definition of an objection or what an objection is, every customer has in their mind what they want. Then when they begin to search, they see what you offer. So what they want has these features, but you are offering those features. Or they want it at this price, but you are charging that price. It could be any number of things, but they've got their ideal, and then you have your offering. The space between the ideal and the offering, that's where objections live. Right? If what they had in their mind as ideal is exactly what you offered, there would be no objection. But that gap in between the ideal and the offering is where you find objections. Now, how often do customers find gaps between the ideal and the offering? 100% of the time. And therefore, objections are always going to be a normal part of the process. And that means that we have to go out of our way to make sure that we are ready for them. And our guest today, Jeb Blount, is going to unpack this. And I'm thrilled. We've had Jeb on the podcast once before, but now we get to take this deep dive on the subject of objections. But before we start the interview, I just want to challenge you, if you're listening right now, how are you feeling about embracing the idea of mastering objections? How are you feeling about really taking this deep dive? I want you all in on this conversation. I want you feeling like this is what I want to do. This is what I have to do in order to take my game to an entirely different level. But if you don't want to do it for me or for you or for your sales manager, do it for your customer, because this is what your customer needs from you. Well, with that, we're thrilled to have back on the show Jeb Blount. We've talked in the past with Jeb about a number of things. He is just absolutely brilliant on all things related to sales. But right now, we're going to focus in on his brand new book. Jeb has a string of hits already, whether it was People Like You or People Buy You. There was Fanatical Prospecting. But now there is Objections. It is the definitive book on objections. At the time of this recording, that book has been out all of 2 days, and it immediately went number one on Amazon. It is one of the hottest selling books of any genre in the country right now. Objections by Jeb Blount. We're thrilled to have him back in the buyer's mind. Jeb, congratulations. You've got another hit on your hands.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Can I get you to follow me around and you just when I walk into a room, you can say all those nice things about me. That'd be the ultimate,
It's got to be. Listen, I remember the first book that I published, and I was out to dinner with my wife that night, and I couldn't help it. It happened to be on my birthday, so she gave me a little grace of checking my phone. But I was checking, the bestseller list, and then I saw it go number one on a hot new release. And I have to tell you, as an author, now you've been doing this more than I have. You got a lot more success in this, but I still have to believe right now you're saying, yeah, that feels pretty good.
It does. The Objections rose so fast, and it went, it peaked almost in the top 100 books on Amazon. So that's, out of 8 million or so books,
right? That's
a pretty big deal. And then it's just been sitting in the 300 to 400s. And when you look at those rankings in all the books, yeah, it feels great. And getting that little orange thing that says #1 bestseller.
Yeah.
You take pictures of it on your phone, and,
sure.
And I sent one to my mom. So
right.
It feels good. It's awesome that people vote with their wallets for you.
Yes.
And I think that's the gift. And the thing because you're an author, what most people don't see is the blood, sweat, and tears that go behind a book. There's a quote in the book that I got from somebody early in the book that says that writing a book is the closest that a man can get to understanding childbirth. So it's that moment, and it's like the day that it launches, and we had a really good pre-launch. The anxiety that you feel, the stress that you feel, mostly because you're just waiting for do people like the book, and that comes after people order the book. People order a book, they don't always read it right there on the spot. So it's a mixed bag. It's a feeling that I don't think very many people get to have, because not very many people write books, but it really is, as you describe it, it's an emotional conundrum. That's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because, like you, I'm sure, Jeb, people say, well, I want to write a book. And I always challenge with the same thing. It's like, great, write the book. You want to write a book? Write the book. The big question is, how do you get the book sold? And so, people think, people like you and I, we're sales experts. We speak a lot. We write books. But at heart, we're salespeople. And if we don't sell, we don't eat. I don't think we're any different than the people that we regularly work with. And so there's always, even for us, that sense of, will people like my product? Have I done a convincing job? I think we're exactly in the same position as the people that we have the privilege to instruct every day.
There's no doubt about it. And when I'm, as I'm writing books, I run a fairly large sales organization in our space. So it's, 16 people in this space is a fairly big organization to run. All these folks have families. I spent my morning working on a big presentation for a client that has engaged us, and I've got 3 other people working on them. My very first call was one of my trainers that was on site with a client that wants to buy a licensing package, and had thrown her a big objection, and she wanted coaching on how to get past it. That's what we do every single day. We don't sell, we don't eat. And the difference in your world and my world is that is the truth, because there's no one writing us a check. Nobody's giving us a paycheck. So we have to be able to effectively and consistently open doors, move people through the pipeline, close business, get past objections, and negotiate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the site, by the way, that Jeb's referring to so modestly, he didn't even mention the name, but it's salesgravy.com. And if you're not a regular on salesgravy.com, boy, are you missing out on a huge resource there that will help with your own sales career. Jeb, let's talk about the book. And one of the things that it's a question that I get asked, I'm quite certain you get asked, how do you decide the topic in the first place? And was it more along the lines of, well, it was welling up inside of me. Sometimes a book just has to come out because over time I feel so passionate about it. But other times I look at the marketplace and I say, I'm sorry, but there's a big fat void out there. Was it a little bit? I assume it was a little bit of both, but what was it more for you?
Well, the story is pretty simple. I was at the New York Mets, one of my clients, and they had me in their auditorium with the entire sales team. And it's what my sales team calls Jeb Unplugged. I just did this last week with a group. It's a lot of fun. And you just put the salespeople out there. They throw whatever challenge they've got a problem with, and then we just deal with it. And it's totally nonlinear, on the spot, no planning, and it's a blast. And I spent 3 hours with the sales team, and afterwards they let me go down and gave me a nice seat so I could see the game. I love baseball. And as I was watching the game, there was just something about the conversation that kept bothering me, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I walked out to go get on the subway to go back into the city. And it hit me that the pattern for the questions were essentially, all the questions were around, what do I do when people tell me no? It wasn't always the same, but people weren't like, when people tell me they're not interested, how do I deal with that objection? It wasn't that overt. It was just, how do I handle no? And then I started thinking about all the questions that I get. Even like when I'm doing webinars and when people like type in their notes, it's almost always about, what do I do when people tell me no? What do I say? How do I handle it? What's the formula? Is there a magic pill? And that evening, it just hit me. That's the book. I was working on another book. I was under contract with my publisher to write another book. I was in the middle of writing it, and I was so excited about this book, I just lost my mind. Like, I knew that this book was the book. So the next morning, I was up at 5 a.m., sitting next to the phone in my hotel. I was over at the Westin on the east side, waiting like for 8 o'clock to click, and my publisher's just right across the river. So I picked up the phone at 8 o'clock, called Shannon, who's my editor and publisher, and said, I got this great idea. We have to switch everything we're doing. We have to write objections. And I fully expected her to give me an objection, so I was preparing for that. And she said, sounds like it's a plan. It's a winner. Let's do it. And this was at the end of August of last summer, and I had to produce this book basically from that point. It had to be written and in place by the middle of January, but that's how the book came out. So it wasn't the market. It wasn't welling up inside of me. It was listening to what people were saying and asking and thinking, all of the answers they're getting from most places are wrong. I've got a better way of doing this. So I jumped in the middle of it and wrote the book. Now, let me say that Sales EQ, the book that came before this book might not have been possible had it not been for Sales EQ, which is, I call it my opus, right? That's my opus on sales. But all the research and from that book gave me the foundation on which I was able to build the Objections book.
It's interesting. First of all, just on a side note, for those of you who have never really studied the process of writing a book and getting it published, from one summer to the next, from concept to release in 1 year, that is almost unheard of. Very, very difficult to do. That's a grind. Most books take a lot longer than that to get on the shelf. When you look at that, and we think about Sales EQ, which was obviously a very emotional book. It was dealing with the psychology of salespeople much more than the technique. But you carried so much of that forward into this book on Objections, and I was kind of surprised right from the very beginning to look at the amount of the book that deals deals with the mindset of objection versus rejection, about the psychology of rejection, and even blowing up some of the myths of what we typically think about objections. Had that been your thought from the very beginning, that we've got to address the mindset every bit as much as we address the technique side?
Yeah, from the very beginning, I knew that for the book to be different, if you look at most books that have been written on objections, and there aren't a lot of them, but the ones that are out there are typically just script books, and most of it's just a bunch of diatribe about how you just need to let it roll off your back, and then here's 10 scripts you can use when someone tells you that their price is too high. That if that worked, we would all be great at getting past objections.
Yeah.
So I took some of the science that I'd learned in Sales EQ, and I understood, especially in Sales EQ, how the buyer's resistance, how the way we, for example, just how do we ask? Like how we ask can impact, whether or not people, are going to say yes to us. And we see the evidence of that over and over and over again. Took a group just 3 weeks ago, and we spent an hour with them teaching them how to ask, and then put them back on the telephones, and they had a 600% increase in sales over their run rate. And this is actual sales, just asking differently. So I did that, and then I dived into studying rejection, like the emotion of rejection. And that was something that I didn't do in Sales EQ. So as soon as we had, inked a contract, which was, they sent me a contract within, you can, like what you said about books, within 12 hours I had a contract in hand. That was how quickly this whole thing came down. And they were excited about it. My very next step was to understand how human beings deal with rejection. Because until we get that piece down, if we don't understand how we deal with rejection and we get past that, then it's going to be hard to deal with objections. Because even though an objection isn't rejection, it's not, the brain and our emotions respond to the objection in the exact same way that we respond to rejection. So until we dealt with that, there was no way we were going to teach masses of people how to quickly get past objection. So started there. So the first half of the book is essentially on how do you manage your own emotions, and how do you influence the emotions of the person that you're asking so that you can reduce their resistance. And this, by the way, Jeff, is why this book, of all the books that I've written, this book, I believe, is a book that every single human being on earth can read and get something from. If you're a student and you got to walk into your professor's office and ask your professor to change your grade, which my son did recently successfully, then you need to know how to get past objections. If you are a person who works in business, maybe you're not in sales, but you got to go ask your boss for a raise, you better learn how to get past objections. If you are trying to sell your idea, if you're a nonprofit, everywhere you go, every human being faces somebody telling them no when they ask for something. So until you learn how to do that, it's going to be very difficult for you to get what you want and advance your ideas.
But there's a natural tendency that we have as human beings to misinterpret the resistance that we're going to get from customers, to take it personally. And what you're suggesting here is that the old advice of, hey, man up, rub some dirt on it, get on with your life, might not be the healthiest advice we could give.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with, getting a little bit of, I call it, growing a backbone. There's nothing wrong with growing a backbone. There's nothing wrong with, with having somebody tell you that it's time for you to buck up a little bit and handle that. I mean, certainly, I know my dad, when I played sports and I, had a bad play and was, responding poorly, said, get yourself up, brush yourself off and get back out there. That type of advice is good advice. The problem for us with that in rejection is neuroscientists have proven to us that type of logic just doesn't work with rejection, because you can't reason with an emotion that the body treats like physical pain. And that's what was surprising to me as I dived into rejection, just understanding what happens. Is the amount of research that had been done on rejection, including the Surgeon General of the United States, and how it impacts the way children operate in school and how they grow into better adults. The amount of research done on rejection was incredible, and how when we feel rejected, it changes everything about us. And in fact, when we feel rejection, one of the things that I learned is we actually bring more rejection on, because it changes our behavior to create more rejection. And our response to rejection is as much biological as it is psychological. But if you think about training rooms across the world and you think about the way we talk about rejection, we treat our fear of rejection as if it's a psychological disorder, and it's just not. It's a neurophysical response to something that we've been conditioned to be averse to, because when we are sensitive to rejection, it allows us to work in groups of human beings in a more effective way. The problem is, like anything, any emotion is a double-edged sword. On one hand, that's a good thing because it teaches you where the limits are on your social engagements. But on the flip side, if you're in a role where you have to go seek out objection, especially in sales, or if you're trying to get something from another human being, when you meet that wall, right, if you bounce off of it, you're not going to get what you want. So you have to figure out how to get past it. And that, I think, is where understanding rejection, what it does to you, where the psychology is, and then realizing that because we can't logic with it, we have to create frameworks that allow us to rise above it and choose our response. If we teach people that, then I can take people who are very sensitive to rejection, and you can teach them how to get past a no and get a yes. It takes practice. It takes repetition. We have to create obstacle immunity by helping them face the same thing over and over again so that we can teach them how to become rejection proof. And with some people who are much higher on the empathy scale, with those folks, typically introverts, people who are really super sensitive to rejection, some of those folks, it takes a long time. But most people, most normal people who are, in the normal spectrum of how we deal with each other every single day, it doesn't take that long. Once you understand how to master the framework allows you to rise above your emotions. If you can rise above your emotions in most sales conversations or most conversations where you're asking for anything, it's the person who has the greatest control of their emotions that has the highest probability of getting the thing that they're asking for.
Boy, there's just so much to unpack there. One of the things I'll have to, if I find this study, I'll send it your way. But I remember reading not that long ago where similarly the not psychological issues, but the biological, physical issues, even around areas of not depression but ennui. Right, I'm feeling a little down. One of the research studies was fine, take a couple of Tylenol, because the pain that you're feeling is very consistent with an actual headache. It's just we tend to look at it and go, oh, again, rub some dirt on it. If we treat it the way it really is, it's a complete game changer. So it's absolutely fascinating. But talk just a little bit about confidence and the need for confidence, and even the customer's need for you to be confident when they raise an objection, and what happens in the absence of that confidence.
Well, emotions are contagious. So for human beings, we know this to be true because we work in groups and we can feel and perceive each other's emotions. We are all empathic at the core. So you're essentially transferring your emotions to another person when you're asking them to comply with some request. And if you transfer the emotions of being weak and passive, then you're going to increase resistance and you're going to make it harder for them to say yes. And it's little things, like just how we ask for things. If, for example, I wanted some of your time, I said, how about we get together tomorrow at 2? I'm assuming that you're going to say yes. If I say, will 2 be good for you? I assume that you'll say no. And just that subtle shift in the way that you say things, the level of confidence that you exude changes the answer that you're going to get. And that's why the position of relaxed confidence is the most powerful place that you can be whenever you're asking for anything, whether it's negotiation, whether it's asking for time, whether it's asking for a micro commitment, whether it's asking for the sale, a buying commitment. Confidence is everything. And it's just amazing. Jeff, when you watch people that we teach how to exude confidence, even when they don't feel confident, the surprise on their face when people say yes is priceless. Last week, I was with a group and we were in a fanatical prospecting boot camp. And in our boot camps, we do live phone blocks and coach people in the moment. So I'm sitting with this young man. His name's Terry, and he's an outside sales rep, and he's making phone calls to set appointments. And he gets. I'm watching him, and he gets a no, and you can tell he gets a no, and so he uses a simple ledge. He says, "That's exactly why I called," and then. Your friends, Mike Weinberg. He uses a Mike Weinberg. I call it the Obi-Wan Kenobi disrupt statement, right? But he uses a disrupt statement, and Weinberg teaches that that say, well, that's okay. Let's just meet anyway. So he says that's exactly why I called. So why don't we just meet anyway? How about 1:00 on Thursday? And there's silence, and I can see the fear. Like he learned how to ask with confidence, but you can see on his face that he's expecting to get rejected. Mm-hmm. And then he goes, oh, yeah, well, 12 will work fine, too, and hangs the phone up. He gets the appointment. And then he looks at me and says, I cannot believe that just worked. I can't believe that just worked. And then we get back in the training room, and he stands up in the training room and goes, I just can't believe it. I just can't believe it. I just can't believe it, how easy it is. And all it was him managing his emotions in the moment and asking with confidence. Look, it's hard to do that if you don't feel confident without a coach. Mm-hmm. But if you can get someone to coach you and you can change your words, change your stance, change your tone, change your body language, and you exude that, you increase the probability the person's going to say yes. And when you're increasing the probability, it's easier to gain that confidence. So it's a process of understanding the emotions and then getting your logical brain, your neocortex, back in executive control so that it can make those decisions in the moment, even though you feel insecure, to help the person that you're dealing with feel confident about the decision that you're asking them to make.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. Let's talk about one thing that you address in the book. I'm so glad you addressed this because I don't know who the first supposed sales guru who said an objection isn't really an objection until they bring it up 3 times, and they say that with emphasis. I don't know who originally said that. I do think that person ought to be taken behind that barn so we can beat the crap out of him. But you address this with the idea that avoiding objections is stupid. In fact, you've got an entire chapter on that subject.
Yeah, so there's a difference between reducing the objections you get and avoiding objection. So, and I make the delineation in the book. My goal is to reduce objection. Mm-hmm. The best objection that you get is one that you never get. So you do that by following the sales process, doing great discovery, giving the buyer a great experience as they work through the process, being confident, not kicking off the buyer's cognitive biases that create, a wall where they want to say no or go back. That's one part of it. But not getting objections on the table, avoiding objections altogether, that's just stupid. So when I'm in discovery, for example, I'm asking the hard questions. I'm asking questions that allow my buyer to say, this is a problem that I have with this, or this is something I'm concerned with. I'm not giving them an objection. I don't say, well, some people with my product have a really hard time with this, this, and this. How do you feel about that? Like I'm not creating an objection, but I'm asking questions of them so that they'll give me an objection. And a great example of this, Jeff, is how I deploy that, for example, in a proposal. So I'm sitting down with a prospect, I'm going through a proposal. One of the things that I do, and you can do this with a complex product. It's not always available to you with a transactional product, but I'll say, well, the next steps for us are this. We have to do this, 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 and this. So A, B, C, and D. And then I give them the dates of those things have to happen. So we have to do this, 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 and then we'll do the installation. We'll get you all set up, do the training for your team. We'll have all that done on this date. And every time I give them a date, I ask them, is that date going to work for you? Because what I'm trying to do is draw out a status quo objection. I need to think about an objection. I got to talk about my boss objection. I'm trying to bring anything to the surface in that moment that would cause them to have an objection before I ask them for the business. Because when I ask them for the business, I'm going to have to ask them to make a commitment on the price that I presented. And if I present the price before I get the objections on the table, then I'm negotiating with myself with a person who has not made a commitment in their heart to buy from me. And it's like that from the very beginning. I ask difficult questions in discovery to get people to tell me all the reasons why they wouldn't do business with me. In fact, sometimes I'll say that. Tell me what's worrying you about doing business with me. That's one of my favorite questions. What's worrying you about doing business with me? And out on the table, we'll get all of their objections. And it's so much more effective to deal with those objections in the moment early, before you've got a price, most importantly, a price on the table, and now you're getting objections. And the tendency in that moment, because it's a price on the table, we fixate on the price and we negotiate a price, but we don't get a commitment to buy. Mm-hmm. So for sales professionals, you've got to just get past all of those things that are screaming inside of you that you don't want to hear no, because that's what's going on. And recognize, and the way I recognize this is it's a basic thing for me. Would I rather deal with it now, or would I rather deal with it later? If I deal with it now, I know where I stand. If I deal with it later, it gets a little bit foggy, and my emotions have come to the surface as well, because we're in the middle of trying to negotiate an outcome.
Love it. We're almost out of time, so let me ask you one last question. When in the book, the way that it's laid out, the arc of the story of the Objections book, it really ramps up. There's an emotional crescendo as you move deeper and deeper into the book, and you end the book when you really get deep into it on the subject of win probability and the relentless pursuit of yes. It just touch a little bit on win probability. It's a phrase that you have sort of coined and gotten familiar with. Tell us a little about win probability.
Well, if you think about sales, all we have in sales is poetry, right? That's the art of questions and the nuance of the relationships. And we have probability. The probability that at any given time with a prospect, that what we do, say, ask, one of those things bends the probability that the person will say yes to us. So your job as a sales professional essentially is to bend the probability of getting a yes from a prospect in your company's favor or in your favor. So let's go back to our last conversation. I'm about reducing the probability that someone's going to tell me no. Mm-hmm. That's first. I just want to reduce resistance and reduce the probability they're going to say no while increasing the probability they're going to say yes. So as a sales professional, the way that you improve your probability begins, with, am I working with a qualified prospect? If they're not qualified, you can be the best salesperson in the entire world. Your probability of closing them is zero. So if you're dealing with a qualified prospect, how do you move through the steps of the sales process one piece at a time? And Sales EQ is a great place to get a deeper dive into win probability and all the elements that are around that. But how do you move through one step at a time so that as you move through each step, the probability that when you ask for the buying commitment, the person says yes is really high. And one of my very early sales mentors, and this is 30 years ago. It's 30 years ago. That's how old I am. He when I first started working with him, he got a blank piece of paper out and he drew on the paper like a stair step. So starting at one corner of the paper, going to the other corner of the paper, a set of stairs. And I was in a more complex sale, and he got a pen out and he put an arrow to the middle of the stairs. And he said, right there's where the deal gets closed. It doesn't get closed at the end when you think you're closing. It gets closed someplace in the middle where the person has already made the decision to do business with you. And everything that you do after that point is playing into their confirmation bias. The decision that they've made in their heart makes the most sense to them. And so once that point happens, all you're doing is you're making sure that you've anchored it in their mind versus losing the deal. It's yours to lose. That's win probability. Win probability says that I'm doing everything I possibly can to make sure that the person has made a decision for me and at some point so that the rest of it gets easy and you start working downhill. So you as a sales professional, you have an obligation to manage every part of the sales process to be perfect in every place that you can and never skip steps so that when you make the ask, the final ask, the most important ask, the ask for a buying commitment, that you can do that confidently because you know that the probability they're going to say yes is super high, and that's what I like to go into because when I know the probability is high, I don't flinch.
Right.
And if I don't flinch, I'm confident the probability goes up even higher that they're going to say yes.
Yeah, the easiest closing question to ask is the one you already know the answer to, right? I love it.
That's exactly.
The book is Objections. The author is Jeb Blount. I want to just a suggestion here to you. If you're a manager, a sales manager listening to this, 16 chapters, that's 16 sales meetings. I think that this is a great opportunity to buy these in bulk for your team. And then once you've pounded through all of that, you can turn around and go to Sales EQ as well. But this is just something that your salespeople themselves would really, really appreciate diving into. So think about buying these for all of your sales salespeople. It's an amazing book. We would expect nothing less from what we've come to learn from Jeb Blount over the years. One of the true titans in the sales industry, a great thinker and a really, really good guy. Thrilled to have him on the Buyer's Mind. Jeb, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on, Jeff.
All right, well, there he is. Once again, he never fails to dazzle us, right? The great Jeb Blount. Did you enjoy that, Murph?
A lot of fascinating stuff. I was really intrigued by the biological component of rejection.
You know, and I think it's interesting. I think it's important for us to be real with what we're really dealing with here, because over and over again, if we don't deal with that mindset, well, I guess we talk about that a lot in the Buyer's Mind, don't we? If the mindset is off, then it doesn't really matter what you're doing by way of technique.
We do, but it's important to be aware of it. I think that's something that Jeb brought up, was that we're not often aware of it.
Yep. No, that's no question about it. The book really deals so much with the mindset and the science of resistance and the curse of rejection. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have the technique side to it. It does, but it really gets deeply into the mindset side of it. And I just want to encourage all of you who are listening right now to really think about your own mindset as it relates to objections. How do you feel when you get an objection? Because as long as you're going to be in the sales world, you are going to get objections. We should absolutely expect that that's going to happen. But what does that do to you? Does it cause you to sort of tense up inside? And is it possible that the tensing up inside is showing on your face by way of a lack of confidence? Because if that's the case, then you're validating to your customer that what they just brought up is a really legitimate concern. And so we have to get in front of these. We have to be prepared both with our mindset and our technique. And we have to do that before the objection shows up. That's why I appreciate people like Jeb Blount who are willing to walk us through this process and give us the framework both for our mindset and our skill set. Your customer needs your confidence. And as Jeb said earlier, that confidence is contagious. So what are you doing to make sure you are prepared, to make sure you are ready, to make sure you are confident? Because when you get that right, that gives you the strongest probability that you're going to win this sale, that you're going to solve this customer's problem, and ultimately that you're going to change their world.